Don't call it a comeback. Okay, but we need to talk about this Xenosaga news. For those who may not be in the know, there's a game by the names of Tales of the Rays. I'm not familiar with it myself, but it is receiving a crossover collaboration with Xenosaga. Yeah, in the year 2023. Cosmos herself was particularly highlighted as a part of this collaboration, and some people in the Xenoblade Saga Gears community got pretty excited, and it started a bit of conversation surrounding this, and a potential return to the Xenosaga series in some form or fashion, whether it be modern-day ports, a remaster, or even a remake. But I tend to fall in line with the side of the crowd here that are arguing in terms of being cautious about this. I understand the appeal, and I even understand the logic. Why would you do a collaboration if you don't plan on utilizing that IP in some way? It makes sense, right? As a way to re-spark conversation surrounding that IP and put it back into the public eye in some form or fashion. That makes sense. However, I am a Nier fan. Nier Automata is my favorite game of all time, and that game gets collaborated with damn near everything. And we have still not seen a Nier Automata 2 or a Nier 3. Unless you want to count Reincarnation, which, I mean, you do you. But what I'm trying to say is, I don't think this speaks either way to whether or not we're going to see Xenosaga return in some form or fashion. I have been of the opinion that I think something Xenosaga related is in the works. With the rise of Xenoblade as an IP, with them pretty much bringing Xenosaga into the canon of Xenoblade, with Future Redeemed, and the post-credits scene of Future Redeemed, too many things start to fall into place where it doesn't just feel like an odd reference to what came before, it feels like preparation for what is to come. And, like, maybe this represents something down the line. Maybe it does. We know that Bandai Namco and Nintendo are working on something. Something's being cooked. It may be Xenosaga or my hopes and dreams. One of the two, right? And with the rise in popularity of Xenoblade in the modern day, I wouldn't be surprised if we see something Xenosaga and Xenogears related to work off the back of that popularity, or that growing popularity. Now, the IPs are owned by different companies. Bandai Namco for Xenosaga, to my understanding, and Square Enix for Xenogears. And I've held the opinion for about over a year at this point that I think we'll see something in the works for all of that IP. Because Square Enix is just, like, reaching into that back catalog of IPs to, like, bring into the modern day. They may be slowing that down, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see something Xenogears related. A well-beloved old game from the PS1 era that sold decently well, that is also an RPG. That's like modern-day Square Enix pretty much coming to your door with a sack of goodies and saying, here, take it. Or when SpongeBob walked into the freaking Bikini Bottom bank and said, now put it in the bag! Put it in! I'm about 50-50 on it personally, whether or not we'll actually see it. I would love to see it myself, but if it materializes or doesn't, I wouldn't be surprised either way. For Xenosaga, I thought, if we were speaking into a vacuum, then maybe Xenogears is more likely, but if Bandai Namco and Nintendo are actively working on something together, it may not necessarily be Xenosaga related, but there was way more of an emphasis on Xenosaga when it came to Future Redeemed than Xenogears, and I think that was by design. Even with Bandai Namco and Xenosaga being shouted out, and that IP clause on the Switch, I think, I forget the exact name of it, but they're listed there, and they're even in the credits if I recall correctly. And I highly doubt that Bandai Namco and Nintendo would go through all those hoops and dealings that had to have gone into that, just so that Takahashi can have his coming full circle moment with Future Redeemed. So while I don't necessarily think this collaboration speaks all that much as to whether or not we'll see Xenosaga again in some form or fashion, it could be a plot, a bullet point in a list of others that form a line. Truth be told, I don't think Nintendo ever saw Xenoblade getting as popular as it has become. It's not Zelda, Mario, or Splatoon levels of popularity, but it doesn't need to be. When you look at the sales figures for Xenoblade as a franchise, and even going back to Xenosaga or even Xenogears if you really wanted to, Xenoblade 2 was the stars aligning for the franchise. It released at the beginning of the Nintendo Switch, which would skyrocket in popularity, and came out in that initial window when there just wasn't a lot to play on the Switch. So you had a lot of people gravitate towards Xenoblade 2, like myself, simply because they wanted something to play on their new console. Combine that with Pyra and Mythra being added to Smash Bros. And attracting a whole new audience of players, alongside the hype wave that was Xenoblade 3's announcement and release, and then culminating in Future Redeemed, the series has started to sell pretty decently well, especially when compared to where it was before. And I think Nintendo, especially, sees that potential. The music is beloved, the story is incredible, and the worlds are striking and breathtaking and gorgeous, and they look beautiful and advertisable, even on weaker hardware like the Switch is. And there's a few qualities of Xenoblade that I guarantee you Nintendo probably already knows about that is preventing Xenoblade from really stepping out onto the main stage of it all. Mainly pacing in the beginning with the combat and just overall gameplay flow. Which is why I think Xenoblade 3 and Xenoblade 3's DLC Future Redeemed tackled the open world and the overall gameplay loop and progression in fundamentally different ways while harkening back to the ways of Xenoblade X, because they were testing the waters and see what stuck. And if you're Bandai Namco and Square Enix and you're looking at this little IP that could start to come into its own, and you realize, oh crap, wait a minute, we have something related to this franchise on the back burner. We have something in a vault of secrets that we can bust out and potentially ride this hype wave. You don't have to invest AAA money into it, and you don't need to get AAA returns. Just something to possibly take advantage of this rising tide that is Xenoblade. It's also why I've pushed back against the idea that the next Xenoblade game will be called Xenosaga 4 or whatever. Xenoblade is the known IP, but that doesn't necessarily mean that doing something Xenosaga or Xenogears related, whether or not they be remasters, ports, or even remakes in the modern day, would just die of obscurity. With proper marketing and enough word of mouth, they could become known entities and work and sell even more off the back of the success of Xenoblade. Video games and the video game industry, at the end of the day, is a business. And each of these companies are out to find ways to make the most money, to try and find the next great thing, what will give them the most amount of money in return for the least amount of time. Now, it is entirely possible that Bandai Namco, Nintendo, and or Square Enix run the numbers on their end, do their cost analysis, and say, you know what, at this current moment, it just isn't worth it. I'm pretty sure that's what they told us in regards to Xenosaga a couple years ago, but that was before Pyra and Mythra got added to Smash in Xenoblade 3. And a lot has changed in the landscape, in my opinion. It's also why I think, well, one, if you look at the scheduling release of Xenoblade, we're due for something in the next, 2 years or so, or, within the next 2 years or so. But also, Nintendo almost certainly has new hardware in development that will almost certainly come out at either 2024 or early 2025. Maybe they don't, but the chances, in my opinion at least, are far more likely that they do. And if you are Nintendo and you're looking back to what made the Switch so successful, and you're looking at this little entity called Xenoblade 2, and you realize, hey, wait a minute, maybe it didn't sell as well as Breath of the Wild or Super Mario Odyssey, but Xenoblade 2 was an excellent way to showcase what the Switch was capable of, and what kind of striking games can be made on the Switch's hardware. And also, it was a breakout success for the franchise. The franchise had never sold more, and still hasn't sold as much as Xenoblade 2 has to this day. I can't comment on the initial sales figures of Xenoblade 2, but the current ones at least are really successful for the franchise. And if you are Nintendo and you realize you have way more hype now on the back of a extremely successful console with the Nintendo Switch, and you're moving into the next generation, what do you want that first year of the console's life to look like? Do you want or not want it to have Xenoblade represented in some form or fashion? It's why I always thought Xenoblade X is the smartest maneuver here. Because from what I know, or at least heard from others who are more knowledgeable in things like emulation and stuff like that, Xenoblade X scales extremely well with more power. So I've been of the opinion for a while now that I think we'll see something Xenosaga, Xenogears, and Xenoblade related within the next couple of years or so. Xenogears from Square Enix, maybe a collaborating team between Bandai Namco and Nintendo for Xenosaga, and then I think Monolith probably will have something cooking up for Xenoblade X, as that is a game that if you put it on the next Nintendo console, that would showcase what the new console can do extremely well. It's a beautiful game with an amazing soundtrack. It is really easy to advertise using that game. And with a few tweaks here and there, like the UI, which is god-awful, that game becomes way more player-friendly and new player-friendly, especially if you adjust some of the drop rates for items or for the grinding. You attach multiplayer that Xenoblade X had back in the Wii U days onto a console that will almost certainly have more of an install base than the freaking Wii U did, and that's a formula for possible success. And you ride that gravy train alongside something Xenosaga related, which you've teased and even directly referenced in the story of Future Redeemed, things start to fall into place for me. It's not 100% confirmed, and if it doesn't happen, I won't be surprised, but I don't think the chance is minuscule either that we see something Xenosaga related at some point in the future. But I also don't think that if we see something Xenogears or even Xenoblade X related, that it necessarily means that we won't see something Xenosaga related, and vice versa. It all simply depends upon where Nintendo, Bandai Namco, and Square Enix think the money is. And if they think that there's enough of an upward trend for this franchise and its associated IPs, then I wouldn't be surprised if we see something from these franchises. I just don't think this collaboration is necessarily the final nail in the coffin, or the final piece of crucial evidence that we needed to confirm that Xenosaga is returning. But it could be a point in a continuing graph of points that is really starting to look like a line to me. And with that, I think I'll call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It'd really help the channel out and help support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe, have a great day, go play some video games if you can, and as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.